Hi everyone, I'm obviously Ben. I'm the CTO of Delivereasy, but that's kind of an emeritus title as just the first developer they hired. I don't have any slides, so I'm just going to do a whole bunch of live coding, so I've just chucked the logo up there. And I'm kind of doing this under duress from our marketing manager who wanted me to make sure everyone knows that we've got a new logo as of Tuesday, and that this is wrong and this is right. So it's done now. If anyone meets Jane, just tell her. So I'm going to do a bit of an introduction to Flutter. And I'm just going to do it completely live coding, so if you've got any questions, just go for it. So a little bit of like, what's Flutter? So Flutter is a framework, language, hybrid blend thing. It's a really powerful tool for making applications that run on client devices. So mobile phones, desktops, and then web browsers. It's powered by the Dart programming language, which is kind of JavaScript-y, kind of C, kind of. It was invented at Google a bunch of time ago, and they've kind of forgotten about it, but whatever.
Someone else picked up?
The open source community is kind of given it some love, and there are still some Google developers who work on it, but it's not, it's no go. However, Flutter, on the other hand, is far more popular than Dart now, which means that Dart's got a pretty safe future. Just to sort of emphasize that the Google team are currently rewriting many of their mobile apps into Flutter, the most famous one being the Google Payments app that you used to pay with like Visa and shit like that. So it's probably not going to drop dead next week like most Google products. And the reason I thought I'd talk about Flutter at a Rails meetup is because we use it at Delivereasy for all of our mobile apps. And I think a lot of Rails programmers should learn a little bit of this kind of stuff because A, it helps you make really smart decisions when you're designing APIs that are going to be consumed by mobile apps. And B, it's actually really fun. And C, it's a really cool opportunity to see what other frameworks are doing that you think you could bring into Rails land. Like I know that since we started writing Flutter at Delivereasy, we've started doing some things slightly differently on our Rails side just from that kind of shared experience thing. And so I thought what I'd do is I'd just start off by making a Flutter app, and then we'd make some modifications to it, and I'd sort of call out some of the similarities to Rails, some of the differences to keep in mind, and sort of some things that are worth kind of knowing and playing with. And I'm going to do this in a bunch of emulators at once, just to try and hopefully get a plan. So the first thing I want to talk about is that, like when you get a new laptop with Ruby, you have to spend the first 2 days getting it set up. That's still true for Flutter. However, and I'm not going to go into that because I know no one has the energy for that. But if you manage to get Flutter installed by copy-pasting the instructions from the website, you end up with Flutter, which is great. And just like Rails, you end up with Flutter Create, which is great. And Rails new Flutter Create. And I'm just going to call it example 2 because I already did example 1 earlier today. And you can see that we basically got the exact same output as Rails new, only we got asked those questions. It created a project, it set up some gems, or in Flutter parlance packages, and then it ran bundle install, aka Flutter pub get. No idea why pub get, I genuinely have no idea, I've tried. So that's the first cool thing. Like a lot of these like frameworks for making applications, especially like desktop applications, don't really give you anything to get started with. Like just getting started is a real chore. Whereas with Flutter, we are very Railsy. I can now type Flutter run, and it will run it in an emulator. I want to run it in all my emulators just for nerd cred. So I'm just going to type -d all, which just means all devices that it can find on my computer. And now I'm going to ad-lib some chat while we wait for that. So this is a iOS simulator, a Android simulator that's stuck. I can't move it anymore. Oh, there we go, we got it. And theoretically, I'm compiling it for like native Mac ARM as well. So we'll see how this goes. So there's the native Mac one. I can click plus, it's a working Flutter app. And there's the iOS one. I can click plus, and my computer's melting a little bit, so it's running a bit slow. And theoretically, this will come up on this iPhone as well. Xcode's the slowest. And you can see I've got the exact same app in 3 different devices.
Is it like compiling to the platform?
Correct, yeah, so there's actually an Xcode binary, an iOS binary, an Android Java AAB file, and a Mac OS binary in my build directory right now. It used the native tooling to do that, so it used Xcode, Android Studio, and Xcode again in my case, but it also works for Windows if you've got Visual Studio, and it can do web if you do a little bit of configuration work, which is quite cool. The way Flutter works behind the scenes is it compiles your Dart code to kind of like a virtual machine thing, and then your application is their Flutter engine, they call it, running your Dart code but in a compiled form. The binaries are really small. Custom app, which is quite a small app, admittedly, on Android is 8 megs. So, we're not talking gigantic app binaries here. But the really cool thing is I just made an Android, iOS, and desktop app in, I don't know, like 3 minutes. And that's just kind of not really that common. Like, people don't know you can do that anymore. Like, I remember when I first started learning C# ages ago, making desktop apps was okay, but it still kind of sucked. You had WinForms Designer, you could drag out your buttons and then double click them to create events, and it still kind of sucked, but it was fun. But this is so unbelievably easy, it's not funny. And the real wild thing is it spits out so much messages, and I gotta try to figure out which one is which. So, we now have access to the DevTools debugger. So I just command click to that link, zoom it, and if we find the right window, okay. This is kind of like your inspector in your like Chrome or your Firefox. What's really cool is I can go select widget, and then I can just click on a widget, and it's going to come and show me the widget just like it would in the web. I can inspect a thing and see how it got built and where it came from, and can click around the tree and it shows me the things in the tree. So that's really really powerful, as you can imagine, as someone maybe not used to developing desktop UIs and not having those tools in the browser that we're all used to for debugging your CSS quirks. It's right here, it's really easy to use. You just get that for free. Just open a Twitter, okay, we'll just quit that. Yeah, so let's talk about the code of it. So I'm just going to exit that. Do I regret that? Yeah, I do. I'm just going to run it on 1 just to give my computer some of its CPU back. So what do I want? Let's go macOS. I'm just going to close Android and iOS for now. I'll leave iOS open because I might use it later. Cool. So now, I don't normally use VS Code. I'm a Vim user, but it was made abundantly clear to me the other day that I'm maybe not super approachable when I use Vim in Tmux. So we're going to just use VS Code. The reason I've chosen VS Code is that this is the wrong file. That's because I'm in the wrong directory. The reason I'm using VS Code is that some people have made an incredible integration with VS Code and Flutter ecosystem. You just open up a Flutter file and VS Code goes, hey, do you want all of the tools? And you go, yes, and it gives you all the tools. So this is the entirety of the Flutter app we just saw. What do we got? 116 lines. Which is pretty swell. Now, I'm not expecting everyone to be able to read all of this nonsense. And it'd be silly to try. I want to talk about a few little things. So, how did I do that? There we go. If you're familiar with React, you might be familiar with this kind of like component assembling ecosystem that we all see in our TypeScript, JavaScript. If you're familiar with Flexbox from CSS and HTML, you might be really familiar with how it assembles layouts. So let's just go to the smallest piece. So this app here has a little floating button, and when I click it, it increases the number. So that floating button is defined here. Oh my god. Yeah. Hopefully it's kind of obvious how it works, but defining a floating action button, when you press it, call this function. When you hover it, display that text. And inside the button, put this icon. And I can change this to something else. Actually, I don't care what I use. And then save, and go to my terminal, and press R. And now it's that. Which is crazy cool. And you're like, oh, that's so cool, Ben. And then I'm like, oh, that's actually nothing. Because if we tell VS Code what we're doing, so we're going to say VS Code, make it a macOS app, and we run it. I'll get 2 copies of it now. Let's see. How did I get this? Go away. How do I make this thing go away? Can't. now if I've done this, let's go put this here for just the purposes of this example, and I change this to arrow right, and I just save, so just Command S, you can see it changed. It was that window, like instantly. I don't got any other icons. ABC sharp, so Command S, done. And that works on mobile devices that are connected to your phone with a cable or via wireless debugging. So you can literally have your actual phone sitting here, hit save in VS Code, and you get the changes instantly. It's freaking crazy. And I think people just aren't used to that kind of really amazing developer experience when working with native tools, and that's why I'm like, hey, actually, these guys have all caught up to Rails. You should come have a look. Now, all Flutter apps are based on kind of this idea of a stateful and stateless and stateful components. So if we find the main function just calls run app. Oh my god. Okay, we're going to Vim. Fuck this. Go away. Is that still big enough? Cool. So main just calls run app, and it gives us our application class. And our application class is literally just a widget in the same way that you'd call like a React thing a widget. So I don't know how many people are familiar with like React widgets before they introduced the functional widgets, but you used to go class my widget extends react.component, and it was great. Flutter shamelessly stole that, might have been first, who knows. And it's really simple to create stateless widgets. A stateless widget has to have one function, and it's called build, and it has to return widgets to build and display on the page. And that's pretty much all Flutter apps is just stack this shit up forever. By default, Flutter's really in on the material design, Google material design world, and so the kind of happy path is to use Material App, which kind of gives you a whole bunch of theming, a whole bunch of accessibility, a whole bunch of icons, a whole bunch of fonts, a whole bunch of really nice stuff for free. But Flutter does have an iOS-specific theming system as well that you can use. I've not actually used it, but I've heard it's fine. And that kind of gives you a place to start as well, which is this home thing. So then this person's defined a homepage widget, and this one's a stateful widget. And so the only difference between a stateless widget and a stateful widget is, believe it or not, one of them can have state. And so all you have to implement there is create state, which just defines the class you have to store your state. And you can use pretty much any object for that, which is nice. And then this is my state. So my state for my homepage, this is dumb. By convention, we call the state classes for pages the name of the page plus the word state and an underscore at the front. Flutter doesn't really have private. And so we just use underscore. It's very, I don't know, like Ruby-esque, you know? It's like, please don't use me in my function, this is dumb, don't use it, kind of vibes. And then again, if you were familiar with React, you might notice like a set state thing. And it's very similar vibes in that you can update any variables you want in the set state call, and it will call a re-render of the entire widget tree where needed. And then your state just has to return build. You might be seeing a bit of a theme here. If you return build, you build widgets. And I've chosen to build an app bar, which is that thing across the top here. And they've put some text in it, and they've used widget.title, which I don't know where that comes from. And then the body of their page is a center widget, which centers things. And inside that, they've put a column. Right, if I should have deleted all these comments. In the column, they've said, can you align all of the contents of the column along the main axis, which is this direction, in the middle? So basically center it vertically as well as horizontally. Again, Flexbox, if you're familiar. And then the children of the column are two widgets. There's an array here. One of them is some text, and the other one is some text. And they're just configuring the theme of the text here and interpolating that state variable in. And so that's kind of it, right? That's the entirety of the Flutter app that just works on multiple devices. And what's really crazy is it's responsive, just like you'd expect a website to be, you know? Which is kind of, I don't know, a little bit unheard of in application development, especially non-mobile, like, you know, desktop apps. Admittedly, like Swift UI and Friends are starting to go that way nowadays, but yeah. That's the main stuff I wanted to mention. Oh, the Flutter docs are Google's entire reason to hire developer relations people. And so what they do every week is they pick a random widget. Let's go to this one. And they make a progress indicator. And they make a widget of the week video about it, which explains when you should use it, things to consider with accessibility, things to consider on different mobile devices like performance platforms and things like that, how to use it, and where their long-term plans are for this widget. And because they've been doing these widget of the week things for so long, it's basically all the widgets. And so like even if you're not super confident using it, you just can kind of just watch the video and go, that seems fine, I'll give it a go. And it usually just turns out kind of fine.
Two questions with that. Like, they pick a random one.
Yeah.
Have they done like any updates on them? And
yeah. So recently, Material came out with Material 3, which completely overhauled most of the material components used by Flutter. Flutter chose to approach that by having a use Material 3 flag in your app. This app I created probably won't have a use Material 3. True. That's a killjoy. The probably created using the wrong version of Flutter. Anyway, the point is you put use Material 3 true and you get Material 3 components. In the start of the videos that have Material 3, they show you both of the widgets in Material 3 mode and in Material 2 mode. Some widgets only exist in Material 3 mode, and you get a compile time error if you try to use one that you can't use. So it's actually really chill, so to speak, to play around with it. They also, because Dart was originally designed to be a replacement for JavaScript, it all works in the web really well. And so this is a live example. I could edit this code here and click run, and I would see the example of the widget changing. I wonder what version of Material they're running. Dad, have I got the keyword right? Maybe not. It's something like that. Anyway, the point is, you can just do it and it works and it's cool.
When you said designed to be a replacement for JavaScript, would you call TypeScript the same thing, or
Yeah.
are they quite different?
No, so no one uses Dart for that, to be clear.
Right.
But originally, before TypeScript was a thing, this was back in the era of like Flow, when Flow was first starting out really, and even before then, they intended Dart to be what Google programmers would write to compile to JavaScript. And you know how Google had that era of apps that were really clunky? Those are all Dart apps. And it's before,
Angular started off
Yeah.
as Dart too.
Angular started off with Dart, so the original version of Angular was a purely Dart framework. Nowadays, they've moved away from that big time, and it's actually relatively hard to compile Dart for JavaScript. But Flutter does their own thing that makes it really easy. I've never done it, but apparently it's really easy. Should we do it?
Delivering on the
The other thing that's really interesting about Flutter is that they do their absolute. Why is it running on iPhone? That's not what I said. Just quit the iPhone and then you can't run on the iPhone, can you? Cool. So I'm going to choose Chrome this time. We'll just see what happens. Don't really know what that means. Should we open Chrome? Oh, something happened. Didn't open my app though, did it? Rude. Oh, hang on, I've got two Chromes here. Here we go. Aha! That actually worked. Outstanding. And I think I'll get all the same things. So if I open up, not the Delivereasy code base. And we'll just change Flutter demo. Here we go. And I reload, it's now just Flutter in the window title instead of thing. So it's pretty slick. In some cases, it can actually update your app that's running without wiping away your state. That was not the right button. Oh, leave me alone. Just forgot on the key, I'm just trying to find it. To hot restart changes. Oh, maybe it doesn't support it in web. That's rude. While we wait for this, I'll just tell you the secret undertext for all of this talk, which is that I need to hire more Flutter devs. So you all could just work on that. So this button, we'll just get rid of more of those words and then hit that. Yeah, there we go. So theoretically, I think I can do this, and then we'll go save. Yeah, and it didn't even reload the app, it kept all of the memory and things like that, which is pretty helpful when you're debugging some complicated situations. You can change the code a whole bunch and then, yeah. And I think I already mentioned that the VS Code integration is top notch, but it's actually insane. If I put a breakpoint here. Only recently learned that VS Code did breakpoints, by the way. So pretty pleased about that. We just launch it again. I'm a bit suspect that that's not the right instance, but let's just see what happens. If I hit plus, yeah, no, where's the other one? There we go. I'm at the breakpoint. I can do the hover trick and see the value. I can actually change the code. Save. Continue. Obvious reasons. It's pretty unbelievably easy to use in kind of an upsetting way. You can be really dangerous with it. And I know I'm a bit over time, but I think it's worth calling out that the Delivereasy customer app, driver app, and what's our other app? Restaurant, yeah. Are all written in Flutter. And the customer app, hopefully some of you got it installed, is actually just a web view in a box. So it's just a Flutter embedding Chrome or WebKit, depending on your device. And we have people tell us that it looks native, and I'm like, cool, that's great. We've done a terrible job of that, so you're either naive or, it's great. But the point is that the whole app, if we can find it, is like maybe, I don't know, mate. This code thing is not my jam. Got 500 lines there, plus 390 lines there, plus 200. Maybe call it 2,000 lines to get our customer app onto, I think, something like 150,000 devices. And we release it like several times a week, or when I'm working on it, several times a day, because. And so yeah, I just think people should know about a really powerful tool for making your things really easy to get to for people. And that's it. Any questions? Oh, yeah.
Do they have anything for, like, you mentioned updating your app a load of times per week or day or something? Do they have any magic integrations for, I don't know, like you merge it to main and then things happen and it just gets published or something like that?
So the Flutter team itself do not, but there are several good third-party tools, like really good third-party tools that do it really well. The one we're looking into is called Code Magic. Which, if you just point it at a Flutter Git repository, it detects Flutter, starts building your apps, and asks you where you want to publish them, and you just give it your keys, and it does it. Our most complicated app, which is our driver app, builds in about 3 minutes clean, I think. Is that right, Dan? Yeah. Which, isn't fast, but if you're doing a cache build, it's seconds. The hot reload thing works no matter how big your code base is. It's only when you need to do clean builds that it's kind of slow. There's also a tool called Fastlane, which was already relatively popular in the Android and iOS worlds for managing that chaos. that also has really good integrations with Flutter nowadays. So yeah, there are Flutter tools to sort of help you. So Flutter supports, you know how we've got like, we can do bundle install gem and then bundle exec a binary from that gem. Flutter can do the same thing. You do Flutter pub get gem. Flutter run? No, it's not run. Something. Oh, Flutter pub and then the name of the command. And it runs that command. So like, there are people who are making third-party tools for this. Yeah, so nothing by the Flutter team, but there are tools. They work really well. We use Fastlane. Our build takes about 4 minutes on iOS and about 20 minutes on Android. The difference being that I hired a Mac Mini for the iOS builds, whereas the Android ones are running in a Docker container on a VM in Sydney. So there's no, like the Docker one has to set up every time. It takes like 15 minutes to set up and then like 3 minutes to do the actual build. And you're like, cool. Yeah. Any other questions?
Did you say there are any drawbacks of using Flutter?
Yes. I'm trying to figure out if I can reproduce it easily. So there's a bug in the Delivereasy custom app right now, if you've got iOS, where for some reason, the app boots, and then for some reason the browser height is just half the size of the display instead of the full height. And it comes right like 1/10 of a second later. But if you've got any like code that looks at the height of the window when the app boots, which you probably do, you have to make sure you time it right, and it's not reliably 1/10 of a second. Like my Pixel 7 gets it in 1/10 of a second, but one of our test phones that's running Android 4 gets it in like 3 minutes. So you know it's painful. So yeah, there are definitely drawbacks. The other thing is that the Flutter ecosystem and the Dart language are relatively new, and they came from a different world, so to speak. And so they're only just adding things that I would consider like the bare minimal basics of having a programming language. Like for example, the ability to have a class that you can't accidentally override all of the implementations of in an inherited widget. And so it's just a little bit, there's a few things kind of missing that means that this should have been an error. This should have been a really obvious error, but it wasn't. And it's just because Dart doesn't have those features just yet. And they're adding them really fast. But that means you have to do Dart upgrades every 3 months. So that's the biggest drawback for me, is that they're adding all this really great stuff, but you got to update all the freaking time. In contrast, you know, Rails has been 3 years without an update now, whatever it is. So, you know, there's a... yeah. Sorry, there were a bunch more questions. Does that answer your question? Oh, and the other thing is that it's relatively new, so Googling doesn't always give you an immediate answer, which kind of sucks. And OpenAI cannot deal with it at all. Jesse.
Do you find that you ever have to kind of jump into the native side of it? So
Yes.
Like dealing with like
Great question.
iOS specific problems, Android specific problems, etc.
Yeah, and I've got a great example. We're going to call this the 7th circle of hell, also known as printing. So just to give you a context, our store app can print tiny little dockets to give to kitchens to make all the food. And the people who make the Bluetooth printers don't make libraries at all for anything. And when they do, they're like auto-generated from some XML documentation. So you get like auto-generated Java, but they don't give you the code for it. They just give you the compiled binary and say like, have fun. And so I was like, I originally spent literally 3 weeks of my life during the first lockdown trying to write a nice wrapper around that so I could use it from Flutter. And I went, oh, this is fucking stupid. So I stopped doing that. So instead we just talk directly to the plugin. And the way that kind of works is you can define plugins in the native language of the platform you want to work, and then you can call into those plugins from the Flutter side really easily. The way it works, if you're familiar with the browser feature called ports, channels, web message channels, or like WebSockets or anything like that, any of those kinds of technologies, Action Cable even, where you're allowed to send messages and you're quite limited on what you can put in the payload of those messages. It basically has to be like string serializable. That's how the Flutter native interrupt works. So you can send messages to your native code and it can send messages back. And you can talk that way and it's really fast. But you don't get to just like share memory. You have to be really, it's a very clear boundary, which is really good because it means when you get a crash, you can actually handle that crash on the Flutter side and restart your native code as necessary. So yeah, we use some Kotlin for some things, and so that's a bad example. Do I know where that code is? Yeah, okay. So this is the code that talks to a Java implementation of a specific Chinese printer with no documentation whatsoever. And so the way it works is you have to define this platform channel, and the string just has to magically match up with your Java code. And then after you've done that, you can call platform channel.invoke method and pass it any string and any JSON serializable object, and it will come through to the Kotlin side as that string and that JSON serializable object. And if I just grep, the Java side gets called with literally the string, so I've just got a gigantic switch statement, and then I can get the arguments out of that object. Pretty much how you'd expect. So the answer is yes, you do quite often have to jump out to Java. We've probably been a bit hesitant to do it to our own detriment in the past. We've recently hired a guy who actually knows anything about Flutter and mobile development. And he's like, hey, why did you guys do this? And we're like, yeah. So that's been really nice. But kind of the point of this is that we've been muddling along for like 2 years without having any mobile developers on the team. And it's been fine. We've shipped a lot of production code to a whole bunch of restaurants, processed literally millions of orders through these apps. And yeah, like me and Dan are probably the guys who do the most Flutter until we hired Abraham, and neither of us done any mobile development before, right? Yeah. So yeah. Yes, so we'll go there and then back to you, Jesse.
Why'd you pick Flutter over something like React Native? I noticed like the developer experience is pretty similar.
Yeah, it is. At the time, it wasn't.
Right.
So when we originally started running Flutter, this was 2020, like early 2020. I evaluated them both, React Native and Flutter, and at the time, getting React Native working was not a fun experience, whereas Flutter Create just worked. So they've put really big emphasis on the developer experience since day one, which has been really good. Our customer front end has more and more React code, and so we are having serious-ish conversations about maybe using React Native for that. Personally, I'm on the fence. The Flutter ecosystem has been really stable for us, minus upgrade pain. We've had very little issues. And when we do have issues, it's because we're stubbornly trying to do something in Dart or Flutter instead of just going into the mobile land, right? Is that fair? Yeah. And whereas, like, you know, I don't know. So at the time, it was a snap decision. I had a week to implement printers. And so I spent like a day doing the research and decided to go this way. Retrospect, I'm not sure I would have had the same decision for the customer app. But at the time, the team was more familiar with Ruby than we were JavaScript. And so there was no real reason to go down. We had no React at the time either. And so there was no real positive or minus. So I think if we were a JavaScript team, React Native would have been a way more obvious choice, but we weren't. We still really aren't. So, yeah. Does that answer? It's kind of a non-answer. It was a good decision in 2020. I'd have to rethink it again.
Yeah, I guess we did a very similar thing with React Native, and the experience of that was a lot nicer, at least from the version that we started on, which is probably around the same time.
Yeah. So I've recently checked out some React Native stuff. I found it completely like a different world compared to what it was in 2020. Like there's like a clear happy path indicated on their website. Now they've now got that Expo build tooling, which seems to be like a game changer for actually getting native builds onto devices. At the time, that was a nightmare. So yeah, literally in 2020, it was the right decision. I had to make it again now. It'd be a coin toss.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to upgrade to that point.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah. Whereas Flutter have gone and done a very good job. Like we routinely get 3 or 4 versions behind, and then we just do a big jump, and it's fine. They release a version every, is it 8 weeks? It feels like it's every week, but I think it's about every 8 weeks or maybe 10. And so hang on, rephrase. They release a new version every month, but every 3rd version is a stable version, and the other 2 are like, here's some new features, they might not be great. Maybe some people use them, it's like running Rails Edge, it's probably fine, the test kit suite's really good. But the actual published official releases are every 3 months.
How's
It's honestly bundler. Yeah.
Because I found the React side of things was kind of in a much worse state than
So this is
what
my
you'd expect from a Ruby bundler situation.
This is my gem file. It's called pumspec.yaml. I specify my dependencies and I use versions in exactly the same way I would in my gem file, to the point where I've not even noticed I've been doing it for ages. There's a separate dev dependencies thing somewhere. You can use GitHub repositories the same way you do with bundler. Like, it's insane. You can literally just write a gem file in YAML and get a working thing. And they do that thing where you can go to like a random gem and click on this little guy and then just paste, and it's there. It's insane. And then if you're running VS Code would have already have run like the Flutter pubget bundle install command for you. And so does my Vim apparently. There you go, done. Didn't know that, so that's cool. But yeah, it's just Flutter pubget.
How many Bluetooth printers were there? How many types?
We currently only support one because I had a shouting match with one of our product people. But there are so many, and there is no agreed upon standard. Yeah, so we support an Ethernet printer protocol and a Bluetooth printer protocol. And we say to people, these are the official printers we support. It's a pure coincidence that they're the same ones Uber support. Any others probably work, but we're not fixing them if they don't. And then I have to fix them anyway. But, yeah. As you can tell, I've recently been fixing printing on Bluetooth. Anything else? Yeah.
Your widgets, they are returning other widgets
Yep.
combined together. Do you ever need to make like base widgets?
Yep. All the time. So here's a widget we use on our like settings page in our app. And it's just we call it the DE list tile. It's just a strip like you might see in a settings page in every single app you've ever seen. It's just because we were sick of running this much boilerplate. And so now we can create DE list tiles that fit our specific guidelines with like 2 lines.
When you sort of combining like list tile text, do you ever make those base ones?
You can. Flutter calls them the things below text, they call them slivers.
Yeah.
And they're really accessible in the exact same way. Flutter sliver. Did I type silver? I always do, yeah. Yeah, so this is kind of a bad example. Flutter calls them slivers, and they are what their widgets are built from, and all of their widgets are open source. So you can go look at them, modify them, copy paste them. Going deeper than slivers would require probably recompiling the Flutter engine, which we've never had to do anything about it. It wouldn't be that hard, it's written in Dart. But, oh look, we've got 2 widget of the week things about some slivers here. Yeah, and so slivers are like the other raw renderable item. You've done a bunch of work with them on you have on the planner.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to know more about it, ask Dan, because I haven't done anything with them. But yeah, they're not terrifying. They're just a bit lower level. It's closer to writing rendering code with like OpenGL or things like that, but not quite that bad. Somewhere in between. Yeah.
Do you have any trouble with the getting approval through the App Store, like with the review and?
We do constantly. That's 50% because we're always trying to sneak past the rules. Some of no, let's not get into that. So that's the majority of our problems. The other half of our problems is to do with they expect certain native functionality and some of the, so when I say they, we're talking about Apple, let's be real clear. Google don't go fuck. They sometimes expect specific functionality from an iOS app that has certain features. So for example, if you want to put a push notification and you want people to be able to tap on it, you may not take them just to your app. You have to take them to the specific screen related to that notification in your app. Not quite as trivial to do in Flutter, so we had to put a little bit more work in to actually do that. It turns out it's actually really trivial if you just follow the Flutter docs, but we didn't do that originally. Nowadays, Flutter has this thing called the Flutter router, which is literally just Rails routes.rb. And if you just use that, then when you have a push notification, you can just say open this route, and it will just open that route. And then in your push notification payload from your server, you can just put the route to open, and it's really easy. But if you didn't do that to start with, you've got to like re-architect your entire app to use routes, which took us like a week. Yeah, which it's not the end of the world. Minor pain in the ass. We also have a lot of trouble getting test credentials with our apps, but I don't think that's specific to Flutter. Maybe made a little bit hard. No, I don't think it is. Yeah, that's a giant pain in the ass. Every single time so we used to have it with our apps. You'd open them up and then you'd tap on the Delivereasy logo like 7 times and it would come up with the environment selector and you could choose staging or production or local development. And we used to put in our instructions, Apple, please always tap the logo and then choose staging, then log in with the credentials we were provided. And they just never did it. So we always failed app review. We always replied and said, hey, did you follow the instructions? And they always went, no, they follow the instructions, and then we pass app review. And that happened every week. And so instead of doing that every week, we made it so that if you enter an email address that's like staging.delivereasy, it just magics you into staging. And we haven't heard from them in months. So, yeah.
What about the review side?
We were having troubles, but they cooled off on it about a year ago. We've found, again, you have to be native-ish. So you have to have the same features as a native app would. Other than that, they don't seem to care what the actual underlying technology is. So our web platform has a few things that only work if you're in the app, and a few things that are disabled if you're not in the app, which help us sort of achieve some of those things. And the other thing we've done somewhere is, so we use quite a bit of Flutter to JavaScript bridging so that we can call into native functionality from the JavaScript side of our web platform. So for example, requesting notification permissions, you need to be in iOS code to do that. You can't even do it in Flutter code. Like you got to straight up just call this freaking Coca function. So we go JavaScript to Flutter, Flutter to Swift, and then Swift to Objective-C, and then all the way back again. But once you actually do that, as long as it's quick and feels compliant with the Apple human interface guidelines, they don't care. So yeah, I mean, yes, the answer is we do have troubles. I think most of them are because we're trying to be cheeky, not because we're not following the guidelines, not because we're in Flutter. We did once get called out for using a button that didn't look like an iOS button in a context that apparently should have been an iOS button. We asked them what was going on, and they said, "Oh, that was an error, and got rid of it." So I don't know. Have that one. Yeah. No.
So if you build to web that you showed us,
Yes.
how do the routes work with that? Because normally you wouldn't be seeing.
Yeah. So they encourage you use their Go router package.
If you're not using that, is it?
You have to implement it yourself, and it sucks. Yeah. So this is the package that the Flutter team maintain that implements like the routes file thing I mentioned. The code is pretty chill, but the main thing is that that's so frustrating. Yeah, so you just end up making this Go router object that's, no one can see that, that's tiny. And it just returns a path, and then you can kind of nest the builders into more routers to create more paths. It's not as like ergonomic as routes.rb, nothing ever will be, let's be honest. But it's fine. We use it for restaurant app. What app is this? Oh, score. Oh my god. Yeah, so, I mean, these are the main routes for the app. So, dashboard goes to the dashboard screen, catalog goes to the menu control page, etc., etc., etc. This Go route fade through is a custom widget that we wrote that just implements a custom transition for an animation between the pages. I don't think I can get this to work. We'll try. Oh yeah, we don't support that on iOS. Good call out, Dan. Thank you, Aiden. Why didn't that work? That's interesting. Give that a minute. Yeah, so on web routing, not quite as ergonomic as like a JavaScript router or like React router or Rails routes, but it's fine. It doesn't totally suck. Yeah, that's a good question. It's going to take a few minutes. Oh, the fuck? That was quick. Oh, it just crashed. Oh no, breakpointed. We're okay. We're okay. Oh no, it crashed. Yeah, cool. So just log into staging. I'm hoping this text is so small you guys can't see it. Oh wait, it's recording. It's kind of a wasted time. Anyway. This might not work because I don't even know what branch this app is on. Yeah, okay, cool. So you can see GoRouter says going to catalog and it's kind of trying to do the fade through animation, but they don't work that well on the emulator. No, you can kind of see it. All of these pages are also routes, so you click on that and it's opened up a route. Click on that and it's opened up a route. Yeah. I'm surprised that worked. Should we just eat pizza?